With this one practice, if you implement it, you can transform any relationship that you have in your life. Now, it will take practicing it and utilizing it, but I can guarantee you, if you use this practice diligently, any relationship that you have that's unpleasant, that isn't the way you want it, you can transform it using this technique, okay? So here's the key to this technique. I'm going to give this to you now, and at the end of the video, I'll share an example of how this magically shifted a very intense relationship that I was having a few years ago, the first time I used it. Now I use it all the time. Here's the foundational paradigm of this. Relationships have three parts to them. There's myself, there's the other person, and then there's the relationship itself. The relationship itself we could see as a tube. It's a clear tube, right? And when we first meet somebody, let's say the first time we meet somebody that we love, or we fall in love with, or that we really enjoy, it's filled with nothing but good things from both sides. They're putting good vibes and good things into the relationship. I'm putting good vibes and good things into the relationship. There's a resonance. There's like a vibe. It's working. It's happening. Whether this is romantic or friendship or whatever it is, whatever kind of relationship, working relationship, we're just putting good things into it when we find that vibe. It's just an example, right? And then over time, inevitably, our stuff starts to come up, especially if we're working a lot together or we're in a committed relationship, a romantic relationship. That would be you, not me. I'm a celibate monk. But let's talk about it in terms of friendships or working relationships, any kind of relationships, right? Over time, our stuff starts to come up. The things that we haven't really addressed, our old programming, patterns from our family of origin, whatever, things that we haven't really dealt with fully and still come up in our lives. Frustrations, irritations, ways that we're kind of controlling or ways that we're meek, whatever it is. Over time, we start to put those into the relationship too, right? We can see these as little commodities or entities that are put inside of this relationship. And pretty soon the relationship is a mess. And especially if you're watching this because you want a relationship to transform, you have been putting in certain things and the other person has been putting in certain things that have been unhelpful, okay? There's good things in there too, even if you're in this relationship and you kind of have to be, let's say you're co-parenting or it's a familial relationship that you don't really have a choice, you could say, around not being connected to them or not being in touch with them. You've both put unhelpful aspects into the relationship. So the thing that you can do that will radically transform the relationship, why? Because everything is energy. Talk about that another time. Is that taking ownership for what you've put into the relationship that has been unhelpful and taking it back will make a huge difference. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'll use an example from my life. So we are an order of monks and nuns. We're all very close. It's definitely a family. I've known them for how long? 17 years. We work very closely together on projects, on teaching, living together, all these different things, right? And so this happened with me. When I first met them, I just started a spiritual path as a monk. Not as a monk, but I started a spiritual path for about 6 years or so. I was on this path. I met this spiritual teacher, my spiritual master. It was just amazing. I was connecting with them. I was having these heart connections. We were sharing. I was feeling so uplifted. These teachings that I was practicing with meditation, energy work was like totally transforming my life. And then over time, of course, we were working together, and we were pretty young. I'm 46 now, and that was 17 years ago, so whatever that is, 29. And all my stuff started coming up. I felt really controlling. I felt angry. I felt irritated by them, all of them, in different ways. But I started just in this way, started putting all these things in unconsciously, right? I started putting these things in these different relationships, these people I was really close with, I really loved, and they are family to me. And but I was putting all these pieces in there that I created conflict, let's say, or tension or friction. When I learned about this, I started discerning what I was putting into the relationship. So I would put in things like being controlling. I was putting patterns in for myself of being quiet and being conflict avoidant. That was kind of my style. I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and we're a passive bunch up there, generally speaking. Super nice, but pretty passive. So I put in a lot of, I would say, passive aggression into those relationships. What else? A lot of judgment. Like I judged a lot of them. And by the way, anytime we're judging other people, we're actually judging ourselves. Talk about that another time. Judgment, what did I say? Conflict, being conflict avoidant, being passive aggressive, being arrogant for sure, like thinking that I was better than them in some ways or some capacities. A lot of things. as I started becoming clear about what I was putting into those relationships, I consciously just took them back, right? I started owning that I can be an arrogant person. I can be a dick. I'm avoidant of conflict sometimes. I can be really passive aggressive for a variety of reasons. It doesn't matter why, but I can be that way. I have that inside of me. It's not who I am, but they are patterns that are a part of my personality. So I started just taking these things back and owning them in a way. And you can visualize like a relationship tube. I started taking the gunk out of the tube, right? Out of the pipe. I just took it back into myself. Now, when I brought it back into myself, it's not like it made things worse. It actually kind of dissolved because I was accepting that I have these parts of myself. I wasn't judging myself, or I was practicing not judging myself for having these patterns, but I would just bring them back into my heart and accept that, yeah, I have these parts of my personality. I don't love them. I don't love that I do it. And I accept that they're there. And I accept that I don't need them anymore. And I just bring them into my heart and took all this ownership for things. And I got to tell you, my relationships, and myself, by the way, felt more and more and more harmonious the more that I practiced this over time. The more that I became aware when I got triggered or frustrated in a relationship, I would look and I would say, okay, what did I put into that interaction? What did I bring to that made it unhelpful? I was impatient. I was judgmental. I was, quick to judge, impatient. Those are kind of the big ones for me. And when I started taking those back, and by the way, you don't have to tell anyone that you're doing this. This is just work that you're doing for yourself, or that I did for myself. Sometimes I would have conversations, but most of the time I would do this inner work with myself, and the relationship would shift because everything is energy. And I would take that unhelpful energy back to myself. So here's the example I want to give you. This happened completely outside of my spiritual path, spiritual community. I was at a job, working at an organization for an agency working with at-risk youth. I had this coworker who, in my kind of judgmental perception, would always take over meetings. Like they would just talk a lot. They were kind of like unaware of how, again, in my perception, how self-absorbed they were. And I got really triggered by just like, read the room, person. Like you're just talking all the time and you're taking up so much space. I think someone actually gave them some feedback about it at some point, but it didn't really change. It was just like that. And I just got so frustrated. And she could tell that I didn't really like her, despite me trying to be a nice guy and a spiritual person. And I don't think I was a monk at that time, but I was definitely on a spiritual path and I was very judgy of her. And anyway, this goes on for like a couple months, right? It's not getting any better. And I'm in this transformational work and I'm trying to figure out what to do about this. Like I tried having a conversation, but I was too triggered and judgy of her. And so it just made it all messy. Anyway, I learned this and I was like, all right, I'm going to give this a shot. So just inside of myself, in my room at the time, I just took back all the judgment that I had of her. That was the big one. The impatience that I had. I actually started seeing her for all of her strengths. And I started noticing that she actually doesn't really care what people think about her, which is contrary to kind of how I lived my life at that time. She was bold, right? She was expressive and she was passionate and she had opinions. And all of these things that I think I judged about her, coming back to, this is what I judged about myself. I was a really insecure person at that time, and I wasn't comfortable really sharing my opinions and putting myself out there and practicing being bold and passionate and expressive. And she was, and I was judging her for it, which is totally unfair, right, in a way. So that was my own insecurities, my own judgments that I was putting onto her. So I took ownership for all of the judgments that I had of her. That was the big one. All these different kinds of judgments that I just outlined with you. And I took them all back and I just felt better in relationship with her, right? I was like, oh my God. And I started, again, focusing on what her strengths were. So in our relationship tube teaching, I took back the unhelpful aspects that I was putting into the relationship with her. And this was just a collegial relationship, right? We were just coworkers and, not even really we were friendly, but we were just coworkers. And I started putting in strengths of how I could see her in her strengths. And I did this, I remember exactly how I felt because I was shockingly relieved by the whole experience. The next day I went into work and I went in I'd kind of forgotten that I did it, and I just went and I was focused on other things with my job and different situations and families that I was working with. And I went in and we had this big company meeting. And I walked in like a couple minutes late, or it was just about to get started. Everyone was already seated. And I look in there and I'm looking for a seat. And she starts waving her hand, and she's like, hey, I saved you a seat. And I was absolutely shocked. I was like, oh, cool. And I like kind of sheepishly walked over and sat down. She's like, how's it going? And she had never been like this with me before, ever. Right? She, I think, probably could feel that I was judgy, or I don't know, whatever. But she was definitely never this nice. And I was like, really good, actually. Like, how are you? And she's like, awesome. It's really good to see you. And I was like, great. And then we had this like really nice bond. And I kid you not, she never showed up that way in a meeting like she had before. She was like way more, I don't know, my word would be chill. Like she was a little bit more reserved. She certainly still shared her opinion and was passionate and expressive, but she didn't do the things that I got triggered by. And this is the first time that I really saw that I could create my reality and that I could mold my reality. So this is about transforming relationships, but transforming relationships is just one expression of how we can create any reality that we wish to have in our lives, right? So it happened, and it kept happening. It stuck. It wasn't just one day. Like we had this great, like sweet, again, like collegial relationship where we were just close with each other and connected, and it was sweet, and we worked well together, and we shared kind of different ideas of working with families on different consults that we would have. It was fantastic. And I used this technique. So again, 3 aspects to the relationship: other, myself, and the relationship itself. And when we take ownership for the unhelpful aspects of the relationship that we've put in, take them back to ourselves, and not like beat ourselves up about it. Just okay, that's mine. No big deal. And do I want to be that way? No. Accept it into my heart. No big deal. Move on with my life. Discern and distinguish the things that I put into the relationship that have been unhelpful. Put things back into the relationship that will be helpful, which for me is really looking at what a person's strengths are and just being dedicated. Everybody has strengths. I mean, the worst people in the world, I won't go into it, but they had some strengths of their personality. The worst people in the world, they were driven. I mean, they may have been violent or terrible or something, but they were driven, right? So there's strengths and weaknesses to every person. I firmly believe that. And so if we focus on putting the strength, seeing the strengths back into the relationship, it will absolutely transform. And maybe if you're fortunate and blessed like I was and do it with dedication, it can transform just like that. All my best. You've got this. And let me know how it goes, by the way. Leave some comments, give us a thumb up, show some love on the channel if you'd like. Subscribe if you're into this content, and we'll see you next time.